Welcome to the archives. Tonight, we turn our attention to a champion whose existence has been marked by transformation and upheaval. We explore the history of Aatrox, the Darkin Blade, a warrior whose very essence has been rewritten multiple times across the years. Let us go back to the very beginning and trace each careful adjustment, each deliberate modification that has shaped this champion into what he has become. The release version. When Aatrox first emerged onto the Rift, he arrived with a particular set of capabilities. His passive ability, known as Bloodwell, functioned with a resource system that began at 75 points of blood and scaled all the way up to 840 points based upon his level. This blood mechanic granted him bonus attack speed, a flat 50% increase at all levels. The cooldown on his revival mechanism sat at a substantial 225 seconds, unchanging regardless of his progression. His first ability, Dark Flight, allowed him to leap into battle. The base damage values began at 70, then rose to 115, continuing to 160, then 205, and finally reaching 250 at maximum rank. This damage scaled with 60% of his bonus attack damage. However, this power came at a cost, as the ability consumed 10% of his current health with each activation. Bloodthirst, his second ability's first form, provided sustain. The base healing started at 20, then 25, 30, 35, and finally 40 health restored. This healing scaled with 25% of his bonus attack damage. The truly remarkable aspect was that when Aatrox fell below 50% of his maximum health, this healing was amplified by an astounding 300%. Blood Price, the alternate form of his second ability, dealt additional damage at a cost. The base bonus damage began at 60, rising to 95, then 130, 165, and finally 200 at maximum rank. This scaled with 100% of his bonus attack damage. The health cost began at 15, then 23.75, 32.5, 41.25, and finally 50 health, with an additional 25% of bonus attack damage added to that cost. Blades of Torment, his third ability, was a magical attack. The base damage started at 75, then 120, 165, 210, and finally 255. This ability scaled with both 60% of his bonus attack damage and 60% of his ability power. It slowed enemies by a flat 40% for a duration that began at 1.75 seconds, then 2 seconds, 2.25 seconds, 2.5 seconds, and finally 2.75 seconds. The health cost was 5% of his current health. And finally, Massacre, his ultimate ability. Upon activation, it granted him a bonus attack range of 175 units. This ability also provided additional blood well filling potential, though the exact mechanics would evolve over time. Patch 3.8. Time passes, and we arrive at patch 3.8. This was the moment when Aatrox officially joined the champion roster. The archives record this as his addition to the game. Patch 3.13. Moving forward to patch 3.13, we see the first adjustments to his power. The passive ability, Bloodwell, saw its bonus attack speed modified. Previously a flat 50% at all levels, it now scaled with his progression, beginning at 30%, rising to 35%, then 40%, 45%, and finally 55% based on his level. Blades of Torment, his magical projectile, received a reduction in its base damage. The values that once began at 75, 120, 165, 210, and 255 were brought down to 75, 110, 145, 180, and finally 215. A notable decrease in power. Patch 4.5. In patch 4.5, a simple but meaningful change. Aatrox's base armor, which had stood at 14, was increased to 18. A small but tangible improvement to his durability in the early stages of combat. Patch 4.6. Patch 4.6 brought a correction. A bug was fixed where the stance effect of Bloodthirst and Blood Price would sometimes trigger after only 2 basic attacks, rather than the intended 3. Consistency restored. Patch 4.20. Patch 4.20. A numerical adjustment to his passive resource. The maximum blood capacity, which had ranged from 75 to 840 based on level, was now adjusted to begin at 105 and scale all the way up to 870. A slight increase to his resource pool. Patch 5.6. We arrive at patch 5.6, where Massacre gained a new interaction. For each enemy champion struck by this ultimate ability, Aatrox would now gain 20% of his maximum blood well, a reward for aggressive positioning. Patch 5.11. Patch 5.11 brought relief to his revival mechanic. The cooldown on Bloodwell's revival effect, which had remained at 225 seconds throughout all levels, now scaled with his ultimate rank. It began at 225 seconds, then reduced to 200 seconds, then 175 seconds, and finally 150 seconds at maximum level. A significant reduction. For players who reached the later stages of the game. Patch 7.5. The first rework begins. And now we reach a pivotal moment. Patch 7.5. This was no mere adjustment, but a fundamental restructuring of Aatrox's identity. His Bloodwell, his passive ability, underwent complete transformation. The maximum blood resource, which had scaled from 105 to 870 based on level, was now simplified to a flat 100 at all levels. The rate at which blood depleted while out of combat remained unchanged. However, the method of gaining blood shifted entirely from health costs to ability casts. The bonus attack speed per percentage of maximum blood, which had scaled from 0.3% to 0.55% based on level, was removed entirely. The revival mechanic no longer cleansed Aatrox or placed him in stasis while reviving. The healing upon revival, which had been a complex formula of 36.75 to 304.5 health, plus 100% of current blood, was simplified to 30% of maximum health. The duration of the revival remained unchanged. The cooldown, already adjusted in a previous patch, went from 225, 200, 175, and 150 seconds based on level. But most importantly, a new effect emerged, known as Blood Rush. Upon reaching 100% maximum blood, and for the next 4 seconds, Aatrox would gain 25% increased base attack damage and 20% bonus attack speed at level 1, rising to 30%, 40%, and finally 50% based on his level. During this state, he would lose all blood over the duration. When Blood Rush was active, dealing or taking damage against enemy champions would grant him 100% maximum blood and refresh the duration. Dark Flight, his leap ability, no longer cost 10% of his current health. The base damage, which had been 70, 115, 160, 205, and 250 was drastically reduced to 10, 35, 60, 95, and 120. The scaling changed from 60% bonus attack damage to 110% of total attack damage. And now, casting this ability granted 20% maximum blood on cast. Bloodthirst, his sustain ability, was fundamentally altered. The tripled healing when below 50% health was removed entirely. The base healing, which had been 20, 25, 30, 35, and 40, was increased to 30, 45, 60, 75, and 90. The healing ratio changed from 25% of bonus attack damage to 5% of missing health. Blood price. His damage dealing stance no longer had a health cost. The previous cost of 15, 23.75, 32.5, 41.25, and 50 health, plus 25% of bonus attack damage, was removed. The base bonus damage, which had been 60, 95, 130, 165, and 200, was reduced to 30, 60, 90, 120, and 150. The attack damage ratio decreased from 100% of bonus attack damage to 75% of bonus attack damage. This ability now granted 20% maximum blood on hit. Blades of Torment. His projectile ability saw its health cost change from 5% of current health to a flat 30 health. The damage type shifted from magical to physical. The base damage changed from 75, 110, 145, 180, and 215 to 70, 110, 150, 190, and 230. The 60% ability power ratio was removed entirely. The attack damage ratio increased from 60% to 70% of bonus attack damage. The slow percentage, which had been 40% at all ranks, now scaled, beginning at 30%, then 35%, 40%, 45%, and finally 50%. The slow duration, which had scaled from 1.75 to 2.75 seconds, was changed to a flat 2 seconds at all ranks. This ability now granted 20% maximum blood on cast. Patch 7.5 March 10th hotfix. Just days later, a hotfix arrived. Aatrox's base health, which had been 537.8, was increased to 580, a substantial boost to his early survivability. Dark Flight's cooldown, which had been 16 seconds, 15 seconds, 14 seconds, 13 seconds, and 12 seconds, was reduced to 13 seconds, 12.5 seconds, 12 seconds, 11.5 seconds, and 11 seconds. Blood price received additional power. The base damage, which had just been set to 30, 60, 90, 120, and 150, was increased to 45, 80, 115, 150, and 185. Patch 7.6. Patch 7.6 brought clarity to his passive. The effect known as Blood Rush was formally renamed from its previous designation, though functionally it remained the same. The visual indicator for his resource bar now turned light red when both the revival and Blood Rush were active, and dark red when only the revival was ready. Additionally, Blood Well now filled to 100% after Aatrox completed his revival. Bloodthirst and Blood Price no longer had their stack counters reset after Aatrox revived. Continuity preserved. Patch 7.8. In patch 7.8, his passive gained a new interaction with monsters. The duration of Blood Rush would now refresh when dealing or taking damage while attacking monsters, not just champions. The bonus attack speed, which had been 20, 30, 40, and 50% based on level, was increased to 30, 40, 50, and 60%. Bloodthirst's healing ratio increased from 5% of missing health to 6.5% of missing health. Patch 7.14. Patch 7.14 addressed a technical issue. Dark Flight had several interactions where it would overwrite spell queuing commands, forcing Aatrox to immediately begin basic attacking once the ability completed. This was corrected, allowing for smoother ability chaining. Patch 7.15. A minor but amusing fix in patch 7.15. Aatrox would no longer spam his encounter voiceover when moving near Tryndamere. Silence restored to the rift. Patch 7.16. Patch 7.16 removed an unintended interaction. Bloodthirst and Blood Price would no longer proc on hit effects against wards. A small but necessary correction. Patch 7.18. Another bug fix arrived in patch 7.18. Aatrox now correctly capped his empowered attack when passing through his Bloodwell revival state. The power would no longer be lost. Patch 7.19. Patch 7.19 brought meaningful changes. Dark Flight now made Aatrox unstoppable during his descent. Crowd control could no longer interrupt his landing. Massacre's bonus attack range, which had been 175 units, was increased to 225 units. Greater reach for his ultimate form. Patch 7.22. In patch 7.22, substantial stat increases arrived. His base attack damage, which had been 60.376, rose to 68. His base armor, which had been 24.384, increased to 33. Blood price gained additional base damage. The values of 45, 80, 115, 150, and 185 increased to 50, 85, 120, 155, and 190. Blades of Torment also received more damage. The base values of 70, 110, 150, 190, and 230 rose to 75, 115, 155, 195, and 235. Patch 7.24 B. Patch 7.24 B continued this trend of strengthening. Base attack damage, already at 68, increased further to 70. Dark Flight's base damage, which had been 10, 35, 60, 95, and 120, rose to 20, 50, 80, 110, and 140. Blades of Torment gained more power still. The damage of 75, 115, 155, 195, and 235 increased to 80, 120, 160, 200, and 240. Patch 8.3. A small adjustment in patch 8.3. His base health regeneration, which had been 6.59, was reduced slightly to 6.5. Patch 8.13. The full relaunch. And then everything changed. Patch 8.13 marked the full relaunch of Aatrox. A complete visual upgrade across all skins. New artwork for original, Justicar, Mecha, and Sea Hunter Aatrox. A new voiceover, new lore, The Darkin Blade was reborn. His base statistics shifted. Attack range increased from 150 to 175. Attack speed growth reduced from 3% to 2.5%. Base attack damage decreased from 70 to 60. Attack damage growth increased from 3.2 to 5. Armor growth reduced from 3.8 to 3.25. Health growth decreased from 85 to 80. Base health regeneration dropped from 6.5 to 5. Health regeneration growth fell from 0.5 to 0.25. His passive, Deathbringer stance was entirely new. His next basic attack would gain 50 bonus range and deal 8% to 16% of the target's maximum health as bonus physical damage based on his level. This damage was capped at 400 against monsters. Against enemy champions, it would also inflict Mutilator, reducing all healing and shielding on them by 40% for 3 seconds. The cooldown was reduced by 2 seconds when Aatrox cast an ability or hit a champion with the edge of the Darkin Blade. The static cooldown was 25 seconds. The Darkin Blade, his new Q ability, allowed him to swing his greatsword in the target direction. This ability could be reactivated twice within 4 seconds, with the second cast refreshing the timer. The first cast struck in a line, the second in a cone, and the third in an area. Each cast dealt 15, 30, 45, 60, and 75 base damage, plus 64, 68, 72, 76, and 80% of his attack damage. The second cast dealt 25% more damage, and the third dealt 50% more damage. Against minions, the damage was reduced to 65% to 100%. Based on his level, hitting enemies at the far end of the first 2 casts and the center of the third dealt 50% bonus damage and knocked enemies airborne for 0.25 seconds. Monsters took 10% additional attack damage and were knocked up for 0.5 seconds instead. The cooldown was 16, 15, 14, 13, and 12 seconds. Infernal Chains, his new W ability, smashed the ground in a target direction. The chain stopped on the first enemy hit, dealing 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70 base damage. plus 40% of attack damage, doubled against minions. It slowed targets for 1.5 seconds. If it hit a champion or large monster, they were chained to the impact area. If they remained in the area after 1.5 seconds, they were dragged to the center and took the same damage again. The cooldown was 18, 17, 16, 15, and 14 seconds. Umbral Dash, his new E ability, had both a passive and active component. Passively, Aatrox healed for 15, 16.25, 17.5, 18.75, and 20% of pre-mitigation physical damage dealt, with 33% effectiveness against non-champions. He periodically stored charges up to 2. The active component allowed him to dash in a target direction, gaining 15, 25, 35, 45, and 55 bonus attack damage for 1.5 seconds. This ability could be cast during other spell casts without interrupting them. The cooldown between casts was 3, 2.5, 2, 1.5, and 1 second. The recharge time was 20, 18, 16, 14, and 12 seconds. World Ender, his new ultimate, unleashed his true demonic form after a small delay. For 12 seconds, he feared nearby minions for 3 seconds and gained 120, 180, and 240 bonus movement speed for the first second. While transformed, he gained increased size and 20% of his attack damage as bonus attack damage. The bonus movement speed refreshed when out of combat with champions and turrets. Over the first 10 seconds, he generated Bloodwell equal to 15% to 50% of his maximum health, based on duration. If he took lethal damage while World Ender was active, he would revive over 3.25 seconds. During this time, he was untargetable, invulnerable, slowed by 25%, unable to basic attack, cast abilities, or use summoner spells or item actives. He consumed the Bloodwell to recover the same amount of health. While reviving, the Darkin Blade's recast timer was locked. The cooldown was 160, 140, and 120 seconds. Patch 8.13, June 27th hotfix. Almost immediately, adjustments arrived. His base health increased from 580 to 610. The Darkin Blade's base damage increased from 15, 30, 45, 60, and 75 to 20, 35, 50, 65, and 80. Umbral Dash's healing increased from 15, 16.25, 17.5, 18.75, and 20% to 20, 21.25, 22.5, 23.75, and 25%. The dash range increased from 250 to 300. It now reset Aatrox's auto-attack timer. World Ender's cooldown reduced from 160, 140, and 120 seconds to 140, 130, and 120 seconds. Patch 8.13, July 3rd hotfix. More fine-tuning arrived. The Darkin Blade's first cast length increased from 625 to 650. The width increased from 175 to 200. The second cast length increased from 500 to 525. The sweet spot size remained unchanged. Patch 8.14. Patch 8.14 brought significant changes. Aatrox could now toggle his banner-style wings on top of switching his sword stance. The default key, Control +5. His base health was reduced from 610 back down to 580. The Darkin Blade's first swing base damage decreased from 20, 35, 50, 65, and 80 to 10, 25, 40, 55, and 70. Minion damage reduced from 65% to 100% based on level, to 50% to 100%. Umbral Dash's recharge time changed from 20, 18, 16, 14, and 12 seconds to 24, 20, 16, 12, and 8 seconds. World Ender's bonus attack damage increased from a flat 20% to 20, 22.5, and 25% of attack damage. While reviving, the Darkin Blade's recast timer was now explicitly locked, codified in the tooltip. Patch 8.16. Patch 8.16 pulled back some of his power. Umbral Dash's healing effectiveness against non-champions reduced from 33% to 15%. When first learning the ability, he now gained 1 charge instead of 2. World Ender's cooldown increased from 140, 130, and 120 seconds to 160, 140, and 120 seconds. Patch 8.18. 2 small but meaningful increases in patch 8.18. Umbral Dash's healing percentage increased from 20, 21.25, 22.5, 23.75, and 25% to 20, 22.5, 25, 27.5, and 30%. World Ender's bonus attack damage increased from 20, 22.5, and 25% to 20, 25, and 30% of attack damage. Patch 8.23. Patch 8.23 adjusted his revival. World Ender's active duration reduced from 12 seconds to 10 seconds. The healing on revive changed from 0.5% of maximum health per 1% bloodwell to 0.54% of maximum health per 1% bloodwell, up to 80% bloodwell. At 80% bloodwell or higher, the healing was now 50% of maximum health. His resource bar now turned red when bloodwell reached 80%. Patch 8.24. A small removal in patch 8.24. The Darkin Blade no longer dealt 10% additional attack damage to monsters. That bonus was removed. Infernal Chains received a bug fix. When casting Flash mid-cast, the skill shot now properly fired in the target direction. Patch 9.2. Patch 9.2 brought reductions. The Darkin Blade's attack damage ratio decreased from 64, 68, 72, 76, and 80% to 55, 60, 65, 70, and 75%. Umbral Dash's recharge time increased from 24, 20, 16, 12, and 8 seconds to 26, 22, 18, 14, and 10 seconds. Patch 9.3. Patch 9.3 brought major changes to his sustain. A bug fix allowed him to once again toggle his banner wings. Base health regeneration increased from 5 to 8. Health regeneration growth increased from 0.25 to 0.75. Umbral Dash's passive healing against non-champions, which had been 3.375, 3.75, 4.125, and 4.5% was removed entirely. It now only healed on damage to champions. The charge system, which had 2 charges with a recharge time of 26, 22, 18, 14, and 10 seconds, was removed. The cooldown increased to 9, 8, 7, 6, and 5 seconds from the previous cast cooldown of 3, 2.5, 2, 1.5, and 1 second. Patch 9.6. Minor fixes in patch 9.6. Buff icons on the buff bar no longer showed up as blank boxes. Infernal chains now properly pulled targets, even if they were untargetable. World Ender's passive effect was no longer removed when Aatrox was reviving. Patch 9.9. The second rework begins, and then another transformation. Patch 9.9. Not as complete as the relaunch, but a fundamental restructuring nonetheless. Base health regeneration reduced from 8 to 3. Deathbringer stance lost its mutilator effect. It no longer reduced healing and shielding on enemy champions by 40% for 3 seconds. Instead, it now healed Aatrox for the bonus physical damage dealt. The damage percentage reduced from 8% to 16% of the target's maximum health based on level, to 5% to 10%. The static cooldown reduced from 25 seconds to 15 seconds. The cooldown reduction mechanic changed. It was no longer reduced by 2 seconds when casting an ability or hitting with the edge of the Darkin Blade. Instead, it was reduced by 2 seconds when damaging a champion or large monster with a basic attack or ability, or when hitting an enemy champion with the edge of the Darkin Blade. The maximum bonus damage against monsters reduced from 400 to 100. The attack frame was adjusted to match other basic attacks. The Darkin Blade now began its cooldown after the most recent sequence finished, rather than on first cast. The cooldown decreased from 16, 15, 14, 13, and 12 seconds to 14, 12, 10, 8 and 6 seconds. Base damage increased from 10, 25, 40, 55, and 70 to 10, 30, 50, 70, and 90. Infernal Chains saw its slow strength change from 15, 20, 25, 30, and 35% to a flat 25% at all ranks. The cooldown increased from 18, 17, 16, 15, and 14 seconds to 26, 23, 20, 17, and 14 seconds. Umbral Dash lost its bonus attack damage entirely. The 15, 25, 35, 45, and 55 bonus attack damage for 1.5 seconds was removed. The healing changed from physical champion damage to all non-periodic champion damage. World Ender underwent significant changes. The cooldown now began on cast rather than after World Ender expired. The cooldown reduced from 160, 140, and 120 seconds to 140, 120, and 100 seconds. Aatrox no longer had buffs removed during revival. The transformation itself changed. After 0.25 seconds, rather than 0.5 seconds, Aatrox unleashed his true demonic form for 10 seconds. He still feared nearby enemy minions, but no longer feared allied minions. He gained 60, 80, and 100% bonus movement speed, decaying over the duration, rather than 120, 180, and 240 movement speed for just the first second. While transformed, he gained increased size and 20, 25, and 30% of attack damage as bonus attack damage, rather than a flat 20%. He received 40, 55, and 70% increased healing. With each enemy champion takedown, World Ender was extended by 5 seconds, refreshing its effects up to the original amount. If at least one champion had been taken down and Aatrox took lethal damage, he would revive over 3.25 seconds. During this time, he was untargetable, invulnerable, slowed by 99% rather than 25%, unable to basic attack, cast abilities, or use summoner spells or item actives, and healed for 30% of his maximum health. While reviving, the Darkin Blade's recast timer was locked. The Bloodwell system, with its filling over 10 seconds, was removed. The revival was now tied to champion takedowns. Patch 9.9, May 2nd hotfix. Power returned quickly. Base armor increased from 33 to 38. Health growth increased from 80 to 90. Deathbringer stance's damage increased from 5% to 10% of the target's maximum health based on level, to 5% to 12%. The Darkin Blade's attack damage ratio increased from 55, 60, 65, 70, and 75% to 60, 65, 70, 75, and 80%. Patch 9.12. Patch 9.12 changed World Ender's healing amplification. It now affected only self-healing rather than all incoming healing. A targeted adjustment. Deathbringer stance's cooldown changed from a static 15 seconds to 24 seconds at level 1, scaling down to 12 seconds at level 18, based on level. Patch 9.14. In patch 9.14, an undocumented change, Aatrox's walk animation for all his skins now performed correctly. Health regeneration growth increased from 0.75 to 1. World Ender's revival mechanic was removed. If Aatrox took down at least one champion, taking lethal damage during World Ender no longer revived him. That resurrection was gone. The healing amplification increased from 40, 55, and 70% to 50, 60, and 70%. The cooldown reduced from 140, 120, and 100 seconds to 120, 100, and 80 seconds. Patch 9.18. Patch 9.18 reduced his wave clear sustain. Deathbringer stance's healing against minions reduced from 100% to 25%. The Darkin Blade's damage against minions reduced from 50% to 100% based on level, to a flat 40% at all levels. Patch 9.19. A small increase in patch 9.19. The Darkin Blade's damage against minions increased from 40% at all levels to 55%. Patch 10.9. Patch 10.9 brought narrative changes. taunt lines were moved to his joke. 3 of his old ultimates revive lines were repurposed as his taunt. World Ender no longer cancelled if Aatrox would take lethal damage, but was saved by Death's Dance's damage storage or other effects. It also no longer cancelled before entering Resurrection. Patch 10.11 Bug fixes in patch 10.11. Deathbringer stance now properly healed when attacking an enemy Malphite with Granite Shield active. Umbral dash also properly healed when attacking Malphite with Granite Shield. Patch 10.15. A small fix in patch 10.15. World Ender now properly feared and stopped Zyra's enraged Thorn Spitters. Patch 10.17. Patch 10.17 increased his ultimate's offensive power. World Ender's bonus attack damage increased from 20, 25, and 30% of attack damage to 20, 30, and 40%. Patch 10.20. More ultimate power in patch 10.20. World Ender's healing amplification increased from 50, 60, and 70% to 50, 75, and 100%. Patch 11.1. A minuscule adjustment in patch 11.1. Base magic resistance reduced from 32.1 to 32. Patch 11.2. Patch 11.2 adjusted his ultimate healing. Umbral Dash's healing against champions during World Ender now increased to 26, 32, 38, 44, and 50%. This was a new effect. World Ender's healing amplification reduced from 50, 75, and 100% to 30, 45, and 60%. Patch 11.19. Patch 11.19 buffed his crowd control. Infernal Chain's cooldown reduced from 26, 23, 20, 17, and 14 seconds to 20, 18.5, 17, 15.5, and 14 seconds. Patch 12.4. A sweet spot increase in patch 12.4. The Darkin Blade's sweet spot bonus damage increased from 50% to 60%. Patch 12.7. A fix for immersion in patch 12.7. Voice lines now properly played when conditions were met. Patch 12.10. The durability update. Patch 12.10. The durability update. Significant stat increases across the board. Base health increased from 580 to 650. Health growth increased from 80 to 104. Armor growth increased from 3.25 to 4.45. Magic resistance growth increased from 1.25 to 2.05. However, sustain was reduced. Umbral Dash's healing decreased from 20, 22.5, 25, 27.5 and 30% to 18, 20, 22, 24 and 26%. During World Ender, the healing decreased from 26, 32, 38, 44 and 50% to 25, 30, 35, 40 and 45%. World Ender's healing amplification reduced from 30, 45 and 60% to 25, 40 and 55%. Patch 12.14. Patch 12.14 continued adjusting his durability and sustain. Health growth increased from 104 to 114, a meaningful boost to his scaling health pool. Umbral Dash's healing was reduced from 18, 20, 22, 24 and 26% to 18, 19.5, 21, 22.5 and 24%. The healing during World Ender remained unchanged at 25, 30, 35, 40 and 45%. World Ender's healing amplification was reduced from 25, 40 and 55% to 25, 35 and 45%. Patch 12.20. Patch 12.20 brought a significant change to his passive. Deathbringer stance's healing was reduced to 80% of post-mitigation damage from 100%, a notable decrease in his trading power. Patch 13.1. The new season arrived, and patch 13.1 brought reductions. Deathbringer stance's damage health ratio decreased from 5% to 12% of the target's maximum health based on level, to 4% to 10%. Umbral Dash's healing during World Ender reduced from 25, 30, 35, 40, and 45% to 20, 24, 28, 32, and 36%. World Ender's bonus movement speed reduced from 60, 80, and 100% to 50, 65, and 80%. Patch 13.5. Patch 13.5 strengthened his engage tools. Infernal Chain's slow increased from a flat 25% at all ranks to 25, 27.5, 30, 32.5, and 35%. The cooldown reduced from 20, 18.5, 17, 15.5, and 14 seconds to 20, 18, 16, 14, and 12 seconds. World Ender's bonus attack damage increased from 20, 30, and 40% of attack damage to 20, 32.5, and 45%. Patch 13.9. Power returned in patch 13.9. Deathbringer stance's damage health ratio increased from 4% to 10% of the target's maximum health based on level, to 4% to 12%. World Ender's bonus movement speed increased from 50, 65, and 80% to 60, 80, and 100%. Patch 13.11. Minor fixes in patch 13.11. Mecha Aatrox and Lunar Eclipse Aatrox no longer return to and froze into their idle pose when their recall animation was paused. The Darkin Blade's visual effects on the third cast on some skins no longer rendered above impassable terrain. Patch 13.13. The archives note patch 13.13. However, no changes were recorded for Aatrox during this time. The champion remained stable. Patch 13.14. Major adjustments arrived in patch 13.14. A complete rebalancing of the Darkin Blade. The first cast base damage reduced from 10, 30, 50, 70, and 90 to 10, 25, 40, 55, and 70. The second cast base damage reduced from 12.5, 37.5, 62.5, 87.5, and 112.5 to 12.5, 31.25, 50, 68.75, and 87.5. The third cast base damage reduced from 15, 45, 75, 105, and 135 to 15, 37.5, 60, 82.5, and 105. However, the attack damage ratios increased substantially. The first cast attack damage ratio increased from 60, 65, 70, 75, and 80% to 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100%. The second cast attack damage ratio increased from 75, 81.25, 87.5, 93.75, and 100% to 75, 87.5, 100, 112.5, and 125%. The third cast attack damage ratio increased from 90, 97.5, 105, 112.5, and 120% to 90, 105, 120, 135, and 150%. The first cast sweet spot base damage reduced from 16, 48, 80, 112, and 144 to 16, 40, 64, 88, and 112. The second cast sweet spot base damage reduced from 20, 60, 100, 140, and 180 to 20, 50, 80, 110, and 140. The third cast sweet spot base damage reduced from 24, 72, 120, 168, and 216 to 24, 60, 96, 132, and 168. The maximum base damage reduced from 60 180, 300, 420, and 540 to 60, 150, 240, 330, and 420. The first cast sweet spot attack damage ratio increased from 96, 104, 112, 120, and 128% to 96, 112, 128, 144, and 160%. The second cast sweet spot attack damage ratio increased from 120, 130, 140, 150, and 160% to 120, 140, 160, 180, and 200%. The third cast sweet spot attack damage ratio increased from 144, 156, 168, 180, and 192% to 144, 168, 192, 216, and 240%. The maximum attack damage ratio increased from 360, 390, 420, 450, and 480% to 360, 420, 480, 540, and 600%. Minion damage increased from a flat 55% to 55%, 60%, 65%, and 70% based on level. Patch 13.15. Patch 13.15 pulled back some power. The attack damage ratios were reduced across the board. The first cast attack damage ratio reduced from 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100% to 60, 67.5, 75, 82.5, and 90%. The second cast attack damage ratio reduced from 75, 87.5, 100, 112.5, and 125% to 75, 84.375, 93.75, 103.125, and 112.5%. The third cast attack damage ratio reduced from 90, 105, 120, 135, and 150% to 90, 101.25, 112.5, 123.75, and 135%. The first cast sweet spot attack damage ratio reduced from 96, 112, 128, 144, and 160% to 96, 108, 120, 132, and 144%. The second cast sweet spot attack damage ratio reduced from 120, 140, 160, 180, and 200% to 120, 135, 150, 165, and 180%. The third cast sweet spot attack damage ratio reduced from 144, 168, 192, 216, and 240% to 144, 162, 180, 198, and 216%. The maximum attack damage ratio reduced from 360, 420, 480, 540, and 600% to 360, 405, 450, 495, and 540%. Patch 13.17. Patch 13.17 brought damage type changes. Deathbringer stance's damage type changed from physical to magic Infernal Chain's damage type also changed from physical to magic. Patch 13.20. A visual fix in patch 13.20. World Ender's visual effects for bonus movement speed no longer disappeared prematurely when the buff refreshed upon takedown. Patch 14.4. Patch 14.4 adjusted his passive cooldown. Deathbringer Stance's cooldown reduced from 24 seconds at level 1, scaling down to 12 seconds at level 18, to 22 seconds at level 1, scaling down to 10 seconds at level 18, based on level. A bug was fixed where the empowered attack no longer reduced the cooldown by 2 seconds. This unintended interaction was removed. Infernal Chains received a potential fix. Inconsistencies with the tether pulling a target when they left the area at the last 0.25 seconds of the duration were potentially addressed. Patch 14.9. Bug fixes continued in patch 14.9. Infernal Chain's timing of damage was no longer unsynced with the tether. Previously, the target would still sometimes be dealt damage after properly breaking the tether. This was corrected. Umbral Dash's tooltip no longer referenced his long-deprecated ammo system. Patch 14.12. Patch 14.12 brought both offensive and defensive adjustments. Health regeneration growth reduced from 1 to 0.5. Armor growth increased from 4.45 to 4.8. Umbral Dash's healing was reduced from 18, 19.5, 21, 22.5 and 24% to a flat 16% at all ranks. The increased healing during World Ender, which had been 20, 24, 28, 32 and 36%, was removed entirely. However, a new scaling was added. Healing now scaled with 0.9% per 100 bonus health. World Ender's healing amplification increased from 25, 35 and 45% to 50, 75 and 100%. A substantial increase to his combat sustain. Patch 14.14. Patch 14.14 addressed an interaction with attack effects. Deathbringer Stance's attack now triggered attack effects if damage originating from Deathbringer Stance would have killed the target. The attack effect's damage now applied first and was prioritized, which could lead to losing the ability's healing in certain circumstances. Patch 14.17. A quality of life fix in patch 14.17. Umbral Dash no longer caused issued basic attacks to unintentionally cancel when dashing towards an enemy. Patch 14.22. Patch 14.22 reduced his ultimate's scaling. World Ender's bonus attack damage reduced from 20, 30, and 40% of attack damage to 20, 30, and 32.5. Wait, no. To 20, 30, and 40%. My apologies. The change was to 20, 32.5. No, let me state this clearly. The bonus attack damage was reduced to 20% at rank 1, 30% at rank 2, and 40% at rank 3, from the previous values of 20% at rank 1, 32.5% at rank 2, and 45% at rank 3. Patch 14.23. A bug fix in patch 14.23. Deathbringer Stance's attack could now trigger both the ability's damage and any on-hit effects when the attack killed the target. Previously, Deathbringer Stance's damage was discarded, causing Aatrox to lose the healing. This was corrected. Patch 25.S1.3. Moving forward through time, we reach patch 25.S1.3. The Darkin Blade received a visual correction. In the floating text display, the ability now used the proper enhanced physical damage icon when enemies were hit by a sweet spot, instead of the physical critical strike icon. Patch 25.S1.3, February 6th hotfix. Days later, a hotfix arrived. The Darkin Blade's minion damage modifier, now properly applied to non-sweet spot hits. This was listed as both undocumented and a bug fix. However, another undocumented change occurred. In the floating text display, the ability once again used the incorrect physical critical strike icon instead of the proper enhanced physical damage icon when enemies were hit by a sweet spot, a regression to the previous state. Patch 25.04. Patch 25.04 brought a visual correction. Infernal Chain's tether visual was corrected. The display now functioned as intended. Patch 25.10. A tooltip fix in patch 25.10. Infernal Chains once again had the proper tooltip description for the debuff. A tooltip change to Aurora in patch 25.09 had unintentionally affected it. This was restored. Patch 25.11. Patch 25.11 brought significant changes. Deathbringer Stance's damage health ratio was reduced from 4% to 12% of the target's maximum health based on level, to 4% to 8%. The Darkin Blade received substantial increases across all its values. The sweet spot bonus damage increased from 60% to 70%. The first cast sweet spot base damage increased from 16, 40, 64, 88, and 112 to 17, 42.5, 68, 93.5, and 119. The second cast sweet spot base damage increased from 20, 50, 80, 110, and 140 to 21.25, 53.125, 85, 116.875, and 148.75. The third cast sweet spot base damage increased from 24, 60, 96, 132, and 168 to 25.5, 63.75, 102, 140.25, and 178.5. The maximum base damage increased from 60, 150, 240, 330, and 420 to 63.75, 159.375, 255, 350.625, and 446.25. The first cast sweet spot attack damage ratio increased from 96, 108, 120, 132, and 144% to 102, 119, 136, 153, and 170%. The second cast sweet spot attack damage ratio increased from 120, 135, 150, 165, and 180% to 127.5, 148.75, 170, 191.25, and 212.5%. The third cast sweet spot attack damage ratio increased from 144, 162, 180, 198, and 216% to 153, 178.5, 204, 229.5, and 255%. The maximum attack damage ratio increased from 360, 405, 450, 495, and 540% to 382.5, 446.25, 510, 573.75, and 637.5%. Additionally, Infernal Chain's damage type changed from magic back to physical. Patch 25.12. Patch 25.12 strengthened his sustain. Deathbringer Stance's healing increased from 80% of post-mitigation damage to 100%. The minion heal increased from 20% of post-mitigation damage to 25%. Umbral Dash's health ratio increased from 0.9% per 100 bonus health to 1.1%. Patch 25.23, the current version. And now we arrive at the present. Patch 25.23, the most recent adjustments to the Darkin Blade. Deathbringer Stance's monster damage cap was increased. Previously capped at 100 damage at all levels, it now scales from 100 all the way up to 320 based on his level. The Darkin Blade received a new effect. The ability now deals 40 bonus monster damage increased per cast, and further increased in sweet spots. A targeted improvement to his jungle clearing speed. And thus, the records are closed for now. We have traveled through time, from the very first iteration of Aatrox, through his complete relaunch, through countless adjustments, reductions, and augmentations. From bloodwells and revivals, to sweet spots and bonus health scaling. From a sustain-focused duelist to a high-damage skirmisher, and back again. The Darkin Blade's history is one of constant evolution. Each patch, a small adjustment. Each season, a new identity. And yet, through it all, the core remains. A warrior seeking combat. A blade thirsting for battle. These are the chronicles preserved in the archives. Rest well, Summoner, until we meet again in the records of another champion.